This is an ABC News Yahoo News live stream, The Candidates Debate. Now from New York, here are ABC's Dan Harris and Amy Walter.
In 1 hour from now, on this stage at the University of Denver in the battleground state of Colorado, the first debate between President Obama and his Republican challenger, Mitt Romney.
And the big question after all the debate prep, all the analysis, can either candidate gain ground tonight with those crucial undecided voters? It will all play out in front of tens of millions of viewers, the largest audience of this campaign.
You know, we in the news media are sometimes accused of hype and hyperbole, but tonight is genuinely huge. Good evening, everybody. I'm Dan Harris alongside ABC News political director Amy Walter. After months of scripted speeches, 30-second attack ads, and choreographed campaign events, tonight there is the real potential for a surprise, for something unrehearsed, for a human moment that could change the course of this campaign.
Of course, we'll be covering it all from start to finish. We're streaming live on abcnews.com, Yahoo News, YouTube's Election Hub, and on ABC News mobile apps. And we want you to join the discussion. That's the whole point of this whole internet thing, right? The social media. So that means tweet us, send us anything that you think we should be covering. You can send us a tweet. We are at Amy E. Walter. You're at Dan B. Harris,
yes.
Right? Okay.
Spoken like a digital native, this whole internet thing.
It is.
That's technical
That's what we do.
speak. Let's set the table for tonight's event. President Obama arrived in Denver aboard Air Force One just a few hours ago. He flew in from Las Vegas, where he was doing debate prep, which he has described as a, quote, drag. Right now, he's at his hotel enjoying some downtime with his wife, Michelle. Today, by the way, is their 20th anniversary. And take a look at this. Here's a picture of Mitt Romney tweeted out by his son, Tag, accompanied by the words, "The brain trust is getting ready for tonight's debate." Those are Tag's words from his tweet. Romney had dinner with his wife and some of his sons and some of their grandchildren at the Cheesecake Factory tonight. He's been in Denver for days now. He's been prepping for this for weeks. He has reportedly memorized zingers that he's been practicing on his staff since August.
So that's far we know he's been to Chipotle and the Cheesecake Factory.
Yes.
There's probably something to that. We should look into what that means for the debate itself. But here's a look at the state of the race as we head into this first debate. So here's the latest ABC News Washington Post poll. You'll see among the most likely voters here, the race remains a virtual tie with Obama ahead 49% to 47%. And after a challenging period for Romney, registered voters by 63 to 31% expect Obama to win re-election. That's his widest advantage in expectations since the ABC News Washington Post poll has been taken during this campaign. And take a look at this question. We asked registered voters about the economy. 78% said they're worried about the direction of the nation's economy. 61% worried about their own family's financial situation. And here's what's really interesting, Dan. That's a national picture, of course, very important. But as we all know, it's the Electoral College that elects the president in the key battleground states where this election will be won. The president enjoys a significant advantage in those states, the ones that we have white or light red, light blue. In fact, we had two new polls out today, one in Wisconsin, one in Ohio, showing President Obama with a pretty hefty lead, over 50% in both of those states. Romney can win without Wisconsin and without Ohio, but it is really hard.
Really hard.
Really hard.
These are tough poll numbers for him. Well, one other thing to keep in mind as you watch this debate, these two men have only met 3 times in person before tonight. The last time was at the back-to-back ABC News Republican and Democratic primaries in New Hampshire in 2008. Since that time, the two men have only spoken on the phone twice, once when President Obama called Romney to offer support after his wife Ann was diagnosed with breast cancer. We want to get right into the debate hall right now. ABC's Jake Tapper, who covers the White House, and ABC's David Muir, who's been following Romney for months now. They're both in the hall tonight. Let's start with you, Jake. We were just talking about how few times these two men have actually met, and there's been a lot of reporting about the fact that they don't actually like or respect each other that much. In the debate prep, how much work has been done getting the president not to be peevish or disrespectful in any way?
Well, there have been a lot of things that they've been trying to work on. when it comes to the unforced stylistic errors that you've seen in previous debates. You might remember George H.W. Bush looking at his watch, Al Gore's heavy sighs during that debate with George W. Bush. And they've been going over those tapes and pointing out to the president how important it is not to come across as irritable or irritated, as sometimes happens. I've experienced it firsthand. And that's obviously, and I've probably had that reaction, created that reaction from some of the people watching the show right now as well. But that sometimes happens, it's important for him not to do that. One of the things he has going for him is his likability. More important than that is his empathy. People thinking that he understands and cares about the problems of people like them. And if he were to come off as thinking that irritated that he's even there, annoyed that he has to answer the questions from this Mitt Romney fellow, that would potentially hurt that. Remember, what we're talking about here is these two candidates trying to appeal to a couple million people, to a few million undecided voters in a few important states. This really is not about the vast majority of the country. This is about one of them getting from 45 to 47% in the polls over into 50% in those key battleground states. So not being peevish is certainly high on the list, Dan.
And I want to turn to you, David, for a second to talk about your candidate, Governor Romney. You've been with him for a long time now, and we've noticed that he has spent a lot of time preparing for these debates, time off the trail, time away from interacting with voters. Is your sense that they have put all of their eggs, so to speak, in this debate basket, that they see this as the most important defining moment of this campaign?
Yeah, I think they recognize it. They're not going to say that, but as you and I know, Amy, just given his schedule over the last couple of weeks, a campaign stop, perhaps one a day on average, and that's because he's done so much time preparing. A lot of people pointing to the numbers, too, this year. He's had 19 debates in the primary before he even got here on the stage with the president just a short time from now. He's had a little more practice, at least recent practice, although the Romney campaign will point out that there's only one guy on the stage tonight who's actually stood there for a presidential debate, and that's President Obama, of course. But as you point out, Amy, Governor Romney has practiced a lot. He practiced as far back as that retreat in Salt Lake City earlier this summer. The fundraiser, Condoleezza Rice was there. A number of top-name Republicans were all there. That's when the debate prep began. So it was months ago. And as we know, in the last few weeks, there were a couple of days where he was really off the trail in Vermont at a secluded resort, one of his supporters' homes, where he began practicing in earnest. We're told that he studies briefing notes almost on a daily basis leading up to this debate. And of course, he practiced in Los Angeles and in Boston just this last weekend. So it would appear that he's practiced a heck of a lot more than the president, although the Romney campaign trying to lower expectations as they go into this. In fact, we were talking with the campaign today, several of the advisors, who pointed out that if Governor Romney gets on the stage tonight and he's able to lay out the framework, his vision of the future when it comes to the economy and jobs, they're going to consider it. They're going to spin this as a victory tonight. There's been a lot of talk, as Dan mentioned, about the zingers, but the Romney campaign trying to lower expectations on that front, too. It was funny, Dan opened up by saying there could actually be a human moment on this stage instead of all these scripted campaign events, and that's going to be the big hurdle for Governor Romney tonight. Will he have a moment where he breaks through and connects in many of the ways that Jake was talking about that come easily for the president? And that's precisely where the perceived deficit is with the governor when we look at the poll numbers. So he's really got to break through when it comes to empathy, compassion, and really understanding the problems of average Americans who are going to be watching tonight.
And it's such a tricky balance because he's got to show that compassion, David, but at the same time, he also has to be tough and draw the contrast with the president. But before we let you go, David, can you just take us into the room? How big a place is it? How many people are in there? What's the I hate to say this, what's the mood? What's the vibe?
Well, the mood, I'm standing about 2 feet away from Jake Tapper, so you can imagine what the mood is for me right now on the stage. See, he's actually right here in the shot. So I feel like we're doing the debate before the debate. But anyway, this is, what's that? This is an arena for hockey typically on the University of Denver campus that houses 8,000 people typically, but you can see behind me here that the Debate Commission has done a really great job at creating sort of a more intimate environment. You can see the two podiums on the stage. Everything's been planned right down to the minute here. The president will enter from the right, the governor from the left. They did some coin tosses, so the president will be introduced first. He'll take the first question, but the Romney campaign won the toss for the closing arguments. So Governor Romney tonight gets the last word. They're very happy about that. But coin toss is right down to the wives. Mrs. Romney will be introduced to the nation tonight first, followed by the First Lady, but within a minute of one another. 8:44, I think they bring the wives in to be seated. 8:45 is when they begin introducing them. So everything is right down to the minute. But one thing that's going to be really fascinating tonight to watch is the format, because these are 15-minute windows. They start with a question. Each candidate has to answer in a 2-minute time frame, but then it opens up for the rest of that window for the two of them to sort of go back and forth. There's going to be a real opportunity for both of these candidates to engage one another, and in those moments, perhaps Dan Harris will see something human.
David Muir, thank you so much. Jake Tapper as well. We couldn't have two better correspondents out there covering this race, and for months at a time, they are doing the hard work, and it really pays off on a night like this when you get to see something as fascinating as they are about to see, and we're all about to see. So our thanks again to David and Jake, and we'll be talking to them after the debate as well. Meanwhile, though, we've got Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz from New York. She joins us from the spin room, I believe. Congresswoman, good evening to you.
Good evening. It's great to be with you both.
Well, we appreciate your time. Let me ask you, what does your candidate, by which I mean President Barack Obama, what does he have to do on the stage tonight? What is let me actually rephrase the question. What worries you the most going into tonight?
Well, I think actually President Obama plans to do what he did during the convention and continue the conversation that he started at our convention, the serious conversation that he had with the American people about where we've been and about where we need to go, and the fact that we need to continue to rebuild this economy from the middle class out, that we need to make sure that if you work hard and play by the rules, that everyone has a chance to succeed. And he'll talk about the next 4 years, his plan to create 1 million manufacturing jobs and cut tuition increases in half and oil imports in half, and make sure that we can continue to make the kinds of investments that will continue to move our economy forward like he's been able to do after inheriting an economy that really was an economic crisis that was the worst since the Great Depression. And I think with Mitt Romney, it's incumbent upon him to finally give us some detail, put some meat on the bone, do more than what we've heard he's been planning, which is zingers that are more appropriate for a schoolyard playground than they are for a debate stage.
So, Congresswoman, one question, though, then for you about the expectation game getting played here right now. Do you expect to see the numbers move after this debate? We've heard from the folks at the Obama campaign saying that, boy, challengers usually come out of these things looking much better than the incumbent. Do you expect that when this debate is over, 2 days later, we're going to see some movement in these polls?
Well, I think the reality is Mitt Romney, as your previous segment indicated, has had a tremendous amount of time to prepare for this debate, had 23 opportunities during the Republican presidential preference primaries to debate, and really has focused in on doing almost little else over the last few months, interspersed with campaign events and dismissing 47% of America. What President Obama has been doing is his day job, continuing to move this economy forward. And President Obama is coming to the table to have a serious conversation with the American people. And Amy, there are ups and downs with every campaign. The first debate is usually a win for the challenger based on recent history. We think over the next 34 days and the 3 debates plus the vice presidential debate, the American people are going to have an opportunity to see the very clear contrast and the 2 paths and the 2 visions. One that would take us backward to the failed policies of the past, and one that will continue to move us forward like President Obama has been moving us forward for the last 4 years.
Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you.
All right, let's turn now to ABC's Rick Klein, who's going to walk us through. First of all, good evening.
Good evening, guys.
Thanks for joining us here. You're going to walk us through the David Muir talked about this a little bit, but can you give us the nuts and bolts of the choreography of the evening?
Sure. This is a loose debate, far looser than we're used to. We're used to seeing lights and buzzers and all kinds of crazy things happen in the wings to tell candidates when time is up. None of that tonight, or very little of it, actually. Jim Lehrer is the moderator. He gets 90 minutes to play with here, and the debate is, by rules of the Commission on Presidential Debates, it is split into 15-minute segments. So it's 6 different topics. Actually, 3 of them are the economy, if you can believe it. That's how Lehrer has chosen it. And inside each one of these segments, we're going to have an opportunity for some real interaction with the candidates. A 2-minute opening statement for each of the candidates, and then all bets are off. Those guys can interact with each other, they can challenge each other, they can question each other, they can probe, they can prod, they can talk over each other. It's going to be left to Jim Lehrer to mediate what could be a pretty interesting night.
What do you two think, as political experts, what do you two think the potential is for real sharp interaction here?
I think it's inevitable. I think it has to happen, if for no other reason than Mitt Romney needs to make a splash tonight. I think he knows he's got an opportunity, and this is his biggest and best opportunity to make the case directly to President Obama. He knows no one's really seen that, so he has a chance to even express that visually. I'm out there standing toe-to-toe with the president, challenging him.
But let me
and Romney did that during the debates, right? During the primary debates. He got when he was up on the ropes, he got very specific, he got very aggressive, and he was not afraid to go out there and really, put his fists forward, whatever he needed to put forward. Some of the other candidates shied away in those moments. Remember, we saw candidates who were at one point the front runner. Rick Perry obviously had his stumbles. You had that with Michelle Bachmann, with Rick Santorum. They all stumbled in those debates when the bright light was shining on them. Not so much for Mitt Romney.
We have 2 clutch players on the stage tonight, but let me just get back to the tricky balance for Mitt Romney, because on the one hand, there's all this talk about his need to connect, to have a real human moment. At the same time, he's under enormous pressure from his fellow Republicans to draw sharp contrasts. And let me just read to you. I read this to you earlier. This is my favorite quote, perhaps of all time, from any political pundit ever. This is from a Republican strategist by the name of Matt Schlapp, who says that Romney has to be, quote, like Mr. Rogers with a knife under his cardigan. Any truth to that?
I can see Mitt Romney in a cardigan somehow.
Yes.
That visual sort of works. Whatever weapon he wants to wield underneath, though, it has to come out tonight.
But it's a tricky balance.
Of course, as it is for anyone. But I also don't think we're not dealing with a Mitt Romney who is totally unknown to the American public. They've seen him on their TV screens, on the cover of magazines and newspapers. They know something about the guy before, so it's not like this is a first introduction. But I think this is the time for contrasts. It's interesting talking to Romney folks. For months and months and months, they have maintained this election is a referendum on the president and his economy. Well, guess what? If that was the case, they lost, because this election hasn't tipped just on the economy. They have to change this into a choice between the 2 candidates. That is a tacit admission that their original strategy wasn't working. This change in strategy, though, I think is so important for them. They need to present what he's going to do differently in the context of what the other guy's doing wrong, tell President Obama to his face what's not working about his policies, but then present himself. I think the 2 actually match up quite well for him.
Well, and tell us a little bit, though, about the style here that you expect. We've been talking about this for a while. The fact that you're going to get a lot of people tuning in, especially for those first 10, 15, maybe 30 minutes, and then they may wander, right, after that. So how do you pull someone in that first 5 minutes without looking like you're over anxious,
right,
over aggressive?
Tight window.
I'd be telling Mitt Romney to channel a little disappointment, not anger, because that's the mood of the public right now, at least the public that's persuadable in this election. They don't hate President Obama. They're not angry about President Obama. They're disappointed in President Obama. You saw touches of this at the convention a couple of weeks ago where they talked about how, we wanted the country to get better, but you know what? It didn't work out. That's the theme that Mitt Romney has to push tonight and in the balance of this campaign. We gave the guy the keys for 4 years. It didn't work out the way that everyone hoped that it would. Now let's try someone different.
Rick Klein, we're going to be talking to you a lot throughout the course of this evening. Don't go anywhere.
Well, I know where he's going to be going.
Where's
He's
he
going to
going?
be watching the Yankee game next to the
I've
debate
got it
side by
strategically
side.
set up. It's
While
true.
eating pizza at the same time.
Yes.
We admire your ability to multitask.
Yes.
Let's get it out to a political legend right now, a guy who's been covering politics for quite a while. His name is Sam Donaldson. There he is. He joins us from Washington, I believe. Sam, in your view, do debates impact the final outcome? Are we potentially about to witness a game-changing event, or are these sideshows?
No, we may. I mean, remember, John Kennedy really won the election with that first debate with Richard Nixon. And 1980, surely, Ronald Reagan, there you go again, along with his famous, are you better off today, helped win the election there. It can happen. And I expect it may happen tonight. Mitt Romney's problem is, if this were 90 days ago, you'd know exactly what to say to him. Steady on, keep the attack on, but you don't have to win every inning tonight. There's no time now. If he swings for the bleachers and misses, he's through. But if he doesn't really vigorously press this to President Obama and make some points there, he's through. I don't know quite what I'd advise him to do.
Well, it's a good thing that you don't have to do that, or you get your other day job. But I do want to talk to you about that.
Of course, Mr. Romney's watching right now.
Oh, that's true. He probably is at the Cheesecake Factory. So quickly, though, Sam, think about the role that the press has played over the course of your career in terms of giving voters a sense of what happened there, and how influential the coverage of the debate is in giving voters a sense of what actually happened at that debate, of really shaping the debate.
Well, Amy, I think it is important to some extent. I mean, afterwards, we all do instant analyses and we say, well, this happened, that happened, and voters are listening and they say, well, yeah, I saw that too. But I think in the final analysis, it's who connects, and the voters will decide who connects with them best. One of the famous debates I remember was Mike Dukakis, when Bernie Shaw, the moderator, began by saying, Governor Dukakis, if your wife Kitty were raped and murdered, would you still be unalterably against a death penalty? And Dukakis answered, well, Bernard, you know I've always been against the death penalty in Massachusetts. Not one word about the poor Kitty Dukakis there on the floor. And voters came away thinking not so much that he had, it's called the Bernie Shaw Bernard, but that he just didn't connect with them as someone who loved his wife. Although I can tell you, Mike Dukakis loves Kitty.
Sam Donaldson, like I said, a legend.
He is a
Sam,
legend.
such a pleasure to have you on. We appreciate it. Hopefully we'll be able to talk to you later in the evening as well. I know you got to go do ABC News Radio, so we'll let you go. Thank you, sir. Let's turn now
I'll still be awake, I assure you.
All right, let's turn it now to Matthew Dowd, who's an ABC News political consultant. Did I get your title right?
There's various things you could say.
Yes. Well, you have prepped in the past vice presidential candidates for these debates. If you had Mitt Romney, if you were within his sphere of influence, what would you be telling him to do tonight?
Well, he has to be aggressive without being mean. And if I were using one word that I think that I would try to use over and over and over again if I were Mitt Romney, which I would use accountability. I would basically say elections are about holding you accountable for your record. Mr. President, you try to deflect from your record. Let's go through that record, and this is what this election is about, is whether or not you should be held accountable for the record you have. I would be using accountable a lot.
And how about the reaction on defense? We've talked a lot about how Romney needs to go on the offense, but don't you have to really script and practice being on the defensive without looking like you're defensive?
Well, I actually think both of them have to do that, but I think you're apt to see a Romney offense and compared to a Baltimore Ravens President Obama defense. And I think this is as much pressure on the president as it is on Mitt Romney, because when you have a lead, and I was there and working for George Bush in 2004, when you have a lead and then you don't perform well, you lose that lead, it drastically affects your whole campaign and everything involved, because you basically sit on a lead and you say, if we do well, we're going to put this thing away. So the pressure and the ability to go on defense that I think the president has to do and stay calm, cool, collected, while being assertive, I think is equal to what Mitt Romney has to do.
But some have said that actually what Mr. Obama needs to do tonight isn't just not make a big mistake, because he does have the lead. And Romney's got this, as you said, this really tricky balance of having to draw a contrast while coming across as somebody who connects with people. You've used the term the 3 C's.
Yeah,
talk about that a little bit.
compassion, competence, and connection. And I think that's actually how Mitt Romney will be judged in this debate, and to a degree how the president will be judged in this debate. I think one of the things that we're going to look at a lot is the camera shots when Mitt Romney is aggressive and assertive and attacks the president on his record. What is the president's facial reaction, mannerisms in the course of that reaction? And a lot of that will tell us a lot about what's going to happen in this debate and whether somebody gets a bump out of this debate.
So let's talk about what you did in your role in managing the spin, because that's almost as important as managing the debate. Look, a lot of people are going to watch this debate tonight, there's no doubt about it, but there are a whole bunch of people who are not going to watch it, and the only way they're going to know what happened is they're going to either watch the news, hopefully ours, or
they
Saturday
will
Night
watch
Live.
Good Morning America.
They will watch Good Morning America for sure, and they'll see Saturday Night Live, they'll see Jon Stewart. So how do you make sure that your candidate comes out as well in that medium as they did actually on the stage.
Which actually, in the end, the importance of is the 3 days conversation that happened post tonight. Tonight is extremely important, 60 million or so people watching this, but actually a lot of people are going to get their information in the 3 days following. One of the things that I think people misconstrue is that you can only spin if you have something to spin. And I remember in 2004, I was getting ready to go out there and spin. Bush lost badly. We all knew it, and I was like, there's no way to spin this deal, so we better just get on to the next one as quick as we can and say, okay, he showed up, he was gone, and get out of there. You can only spin if there's a moment that allows you to spin, and the best thing that allows you to spin is if it's a moment that feeds something you've already been talking about. So if Mitt Romney looks disconnected, if Mitt Romney doesn't look compassionate, you can spin that. Or if the president looks somewhat aloof and all that, you can spin that. But if there's not those moments that feed it, you can't really spin something out of nothing.
Is the stage set for a Mitt Romney comeback narrative when we're talking about how the media is going to deal with this over the next 3 days? The story for weeks now has been Romney's lagging, Romney's lagging. Doesn't the media love a comeback story, and won't there be sort of an eye to those moments where he looks strong tonight?
America loves a comeback story. We
yes.
all love a comeback story. We would do nothing more than over the next 32 days that we sort of now go into a new phase where Mitt Romney is competitive. He might take a lead. I actually think what's going to happen is that's actually going to happen out from tonight. I think that absent some major error by Mitt Romney, he is going to get some level of bump out of this debate. And this race is going to go from whatever it is today, a 3 or 4 point race, to probably an even race by this weekend. I would guess that's going to happen because, as we've all talked about, the challenger by standing next to the President of the United States automatically is elevated to a different level than he was before tonight. And then when that happens, for those few people that are left that are still switching back and forth, he'll probably get a bump out of it. The question then becomes, does he have something to use out of this to sustain himself for the next 30 days and keep that bump? And that is a question we obviously don't know. It has to be substantive tonight and not just ethereal that it only lasts briefly.
Right. Matt, thank you. We'll talk to you after the debate. Let's get down to ABC's John Carl, who's in Washington, D.C. tonight, manning the fact-check desk. John, give us a sense of what you're going to be looking for tonight.
Well, Dan, we've got a system here where we're going to be looking at the various claims that are made back and forth, and we are going to rate them. And we've got 4 different categories of rating, starting with fact. They might just tell the truth from time to time, apparently, to not quite fact, to mostly fiction, to fiction. We've got a big briefing book here, as you can imagine. This is just part of what we've been going through, because obviously we've been already hearing a lot of the arguments back and forth in the advertisements and on the stump speech, on the stump speeches, and we've already heard, frankly, a lot of fictional material going back and forth. We've heard the president, one of the ones that he comes back to over and over again is that Mitt Romney is going to raise middle-class taxes. Well, Mitt Romney's plan doesn't actually call for raising middle-class taxes, so that's not true, although Romney does promise to both balance the budget and cut tax rates by closing loopholes. None of that really adds up, so you have to kind of try to slice it and dice it and come at what can we get to, what is actually undisputed facts in the arguments going back and forth. One of the big ones that we've heard over and over again from Romney is that the president has gutted the work requirement for welfare. Well, that's not exactly true either. There's a germ of a truth in terms of waivers that have been granted to states, but to say he's gutted the work requirement is just not correct either. So we're going to be trying to go back and forth and try to keep them as close to the fact side of that meter as we can, although I imagine we're going to be seeing at least a fair amount of fiction.
So John, how have we done, Dan and I? Have we gone on the mostly fact, or are we on the mostly fiction? Where would we sit on that?
I didn't hear the beginning of your question, Amy.
I was just wondering how Dan and I would have done on the actual art scale. So would we be mostly fiction, or are we fact?
You know, Dan's kind of an arty guy. You know, he's really a man of the arts, and I wouldn't ever want the guy to be totally on the fact side. He's got to have a little bit of fiction. But I think both of you guys are pretty on target.
Thank you.
So,
thank you for protecting
you
my
got
artistic
my truth
license.
meter.
But John, let me just ask you a quick question before we let you go.
Okay.
Not to be obnoxious, but how much do you think political professionals care whether they're being accurate, whether guys like you hold them accountable, or do they just, you know, if it's an effective attack, they just brush it off?
Well, they certainly do care, judging by the attention we're already getting. Once it became clear we were doing this. I have been lobbied and hammered already by both campaigns who have people dedicated to kind of dealing with fact checkers. But I've got to tell you, if they have a real good zinger, if they've got an attack line they think is effective, the fact checkers are nowhere near that important. They don't mind. If we could call them false. If the line rings true at home, they're going to go for it. And we had a famous quote at a Yahoo ABC forum in Tampa where a senior person on the Romney campaign said, "We're not going to let fact checkers run our campaign." And I think both campaigns would actually agree with that.
John Karl, excellent to have you on tonight. We'll talk to you after the debate and get your verdict on whether people are true or false. We'll talk to you a little bit later. Thanks, John. Nicole Wallace is sitting next to us now. Nicole is a ABC News political consultant or political analyst. I don't know exactly. Did I get that right? Either hat fits. She has worked on many big campaigns as a Republican strategist in years past. You laughed when I asked that question of John Karl about whether political professionals care, whether they're being accurate if the attack works.
That's right.
What's the real answer?
I think it changed. I mean, it used to matter. We used to live and die by factcheck.org, and both sides used to point to them when they would vouch for the accuracy of an ad you put up, and it was a really big deal. This campaign seems to be the first one in a long time, and maybe it's because the media climate is so diffuse that it doesn't. No single authority really matters, and everyone's getting their information from enough of their own sources that they believe what they want. So I think this is the first election cycle that I've seen when it doesn't seem to matter quite as much for either side.
So tell us a little bit about getting your candidate prepared. You and I talked a little bit about this. You, of course, worked closely with Sarah Palin, getting her prepared for her debate. Getting somebody like Paul Ryan prepared, very different. But
but a little more similar to getting someone like John McCain prepared, and someone with a burden like the one you were talking to Matt Dowd about, someone who is behind, walks into these debates with the weight of the world on them. They have to do 11 things, 9.5 of them near impossible all at once, to have all of us say that they've done what Governor Chris Christie predicted Mitt Romney would do, which is to shake up the race by tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. So, getting them prepared, it really falls into three categories. There's the substance, and it's amazing how, a little bit of stage fright sets in when in 90 minutes they have to accomplish so much for their campaigns and their political futures. But you really do have to spend time on the substance. There are massive briefing books prepared to brief these guys on their own records. It's somewhat staggeringly ridiculous if you think about it. There's the strategy, how to go after, in our case it was Senator Obama, and then there's the style, the grace points, the humor, how do you leave yourself open for those moments. And frankly, McCain was a lot more open to cracking a joke, usually at himself and at his own expense, than someone like Romney is. So I'm not sure what kind of advice they've given him in that category.
The maddening thing in terms of prepping people for something like this must be that as much prep as you do, the thing that gets remembered most often is the unpredictable moment.
Right, and what's funny to me is that doesn't suit either of these candidates very well. I mean, these are two very formal guys who are each I think comfortable in the bubbles in which they exist, politically speaking. And so I think this debate, the drama, will come from the moments that are out of both of their control. And I think that's what we'll all be watching for tonight. Will there be some moment where that something said that wasn't in any of their briefing books, it wasn't on any of those index cards that they practiced, and it wasn't anything that was rehearsed. And that's sort of the moment that audiences hunger for, and that can have the greatest impact on who's perceived to have won or lost.
Well, we've been hearing a lot about this from candidates past, everybody from Nixon to Dukakis, saying they over-prepared, and so they weren't as agile as they wanted to be on stage. It seems to me that where candidates get in trouble, and I'm curious to get your take on this, is when they are listening to the question, but they're not hearing the question. And so they answer it just like the Kitty Dukakis question in a this was the policy question, as opposed to what I'm really asking you is, what kind of empathy? We're looking for the empathy issue, or we're looking, and so in Romney's case, do you prepare them, or well, in both cases, but do you prepare your candidates then to say, here's what you need to do, so when they're asking you this, remember, you want to be portraying this.
I mean, the ability to show empathy is an area where they're on their own. You know, I mean, and this is where
sad face.
This is where we, the voters, are taking the measure of them, not as politicians and not as people who govern or legislate, but as human beings. Do they have the capacity? And this is where sometimes the better politician is defeated by the better man. So this is a really interesting space to watch for.
Take us behind the scenes. After all the prepping, the people who are doing tonight what you have done for candidates in the past, are they watching and freaking out? Or
yeah, you know, I just had a baby, and so I can make this analogy now. I mean, I think it's sort of like you wait and you wait and you wait and you wait and you wait, and then it comes, and it's, you know, and it's sort of, you know, you just have to wait and see what, you know, what the baby looks like. I mean, they're waiting to see what kind of performance their candidate gives. They've done everything they can do. They've prepared him as best they can. They've created rooms at hotel suites all over this country that look exactly like what the stage will look like. They took out a tape measure. They measured exactly how far. They've done everything in their power, and now is you know, it's like the Olympics or like a sporting event. Now they're on the field, and you sort of have to sit back and hope for the best.
I have new appreciation for what you do. New appreciation.
It is. It's like I love the part about, I hope when this baby comes out, what is this?
You know, you take your prenatal vitamins. You know, you exercise and rest. You hope everything's good.
And don't drink too much wine.
Right, not too much wine or Ambien.
Nicole Wallace, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're gonna circle back with you after the debate.
Great.
We look forward to that.
Thank you.
Really interested to see what happens. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Our next guest, Senator John Thune, Republican senator. Senator, good evening. Thanks for joining us.
Good evening. Hi, Dan. How are you? Hi, Amy.
Good. How are you? Glad to see that you're there in Denver, out there in the spin room. Tell us, as somebody who is being tasked now to give the press the expectations, do you expect coming out of this debate that we're going to see Mitt Romney make some movement in the polls?
Well, that would be great, Amy. I don't know the answer to that. I think a lot of it will depend on how things go this evening, but I do know that he approaches this debate, I think, very well prepared, but also very realistic that he's taking on an incumbent president. It's always very difficult to unseat an incumbent president, and knows full well that you know, this is going to be an opportunity for him to get his message out in an unfiltered way, which I think, you know, the American people, now that they're starting to pay closer attention to this presidential election, are looking for the clear choice, I think, that's going to be presented to him this evening. And I hope that it's all said and done that you know, Governor Romney will have had the chance to get his message out, talk about his vision for the future. And I think also point out how over the last 4 years President Obama has had a chance, but despite his best efforts, things have gotten worse for most Americans. And if you look at all the economic indicators, that's pretty clear. So this is an opportunity for Governor Romney to get his message across. I hope that we have a good debate this evening. We get a clear, you know, statement of the differences, and I think it'll become clear to the American people who the choice is in November.
Senator, I would venture to guess that the odds are high that President Obama will bring up Mitt Romney's 47% comment, which created so much controversy. If you're advising Mitt Romney, how does he deflect the potential for repeated references to that 47%?
You know, I think, Dan, what he's got to do is acknowledge that wasn't stated, and I think he has in the best way. But I think what he's got to talk about is what he was trying to get across, and that is that he wants an America where the private economy is jobs, where you've got less and less people dependent upon government, and that the people in this country who really want to get out into the private economy and have an opportunity get that chance. And I think that talking about the importance of a free enterprise system where we're growing the private economy and creating jobs as opposed to growing government, which is what President Obama has been doing now for the past 4 years, is how he's got to delineate, I think, the difference between he and President Obama, and talk about that issue. Because obviously that is something that will get brought up. I don't have any question that it will. I think he's got to be very forceful in describing what he would do if elected president, how he would use his skill set, his background, his experience in business to create jobs and give more people an opportunity in the private economy so they don't have to depend upon government.
Senator, I want to ask you, though, when we're talking about the economy, it does seem that Americans, while they're certainly not happy with where things are, they're happier than they've been in quite some time. We've seen on the question of, do you think the country's headed in the right direction? We're at an all-time high since 2008. More people now feeling a little bit better about what they say, their optimism about the economy. So is the task now for Mitt Romney to actually run against what people see as an economy that's maybe getting a little bit better?
Well, we all hope the economy improves, Amy, but I do think that at some point economic gravity is going to set in. I think that for some reason, the president's numbers and the right track, wrong track number have held up despite what all the metrics out there suggest. You've got this chronic high unemployment, you've got a stagnant economy. The second quarter last year has been adjusted downwards in terms of economic growth to 1.3%. Healthcare costs up 30%. Fuel costs have doubled since the president took office. College tuition's up by 25%. And then you've got this massive debt that you're passing on to our children and grandchildren. That's the reality. And for some reason, that really hasn't hit out there, I think, with a lot of people. But I think that the debates are an opportunity to do that.
Well, Senator, that's a good question, which is why do you think he is defying political gravity? There are a lot of folks out there, including a lot of Republicans, that say it's because Mitt Romney has become the story, because the campaign has been a referendum on Romney. Why do you think that the president has been holding up in his numbers, even as the economic numbers continue to be not as rosy?
Well, I think they have done a good job, Amy, of creating these distractions and getting off on rabbit trails. I think for Governor Romney, it's important for him to get out there and very forcefully articulate his plan for how he would create jobs and grow the economy and how it differs from President Obama's plan. But he's also got to point out the Obama record, which, as I mentioned, is not a good one for most Americans. And I think one of the reasons that his numbers have held up is the stock market still is holding in pretty good shape, and people seem to think at least that we're moving in the right direction, or at least a larger minority than there was before. But I think when they really start to focus on this election and look at where they are versus where they were 4 years ago, and realize that their average income, this is average income nationally, is down by $4,500 at a time when everything else in their lives is going up, that they're going to come to a different conclusion about this than perhaps they have already. Some people have said it's the Clinton effect. I think that's probably overstated, but I do think that at some point economic reality and economic gravity will set in, and it's going to be harder for this president to get on top of that.
Not a lot of time left for gravity to kick in. 34 days. Senator, we really appreciate your time.
That's
Thank
right.
you very much. Enjoy the evening, please.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you again.
You too.
Let's bring in now Jeff Mackey, who's from Yahoo Finance, our partners over at Yahoo News, our partners that we value so much. Thank you very much for coming on tonight. We appreciate it. So we're just talking about the economy. Most people look at the economy through the lens of, how am I doing?
Right.
Paint the broader picture. How are we as a country doing 4.5 years post-collapse?
Well, today's the 4th anniversary of TARP, the Troubled Asset Relief Program. It was unprecedented. We were in the middle of a financial crisis, staring into the abyss. Do I feel better now than I did 4 years ago? Yeah. How is the country doing? Terribly. I think the job situation is a national disgrace. It's a tragedy.
8.1%.
It's worse than that. Let me tell you why. 368,000 Americans last month quit looking. They dropped out of the labor force. That means they didn't have a job or look for a job in the last 4 weeks. We aren't a nation of quitters. We have to do better. I don't lay that on either party, and I don't think a lot of people do. I think that the mood of the country is one of, someone lead. Just show me. Just show me a way out of this thing, because we're not doing well. You can throw stats at it all day, but I think that the number of people dropping out of the labor force, fewest number of people participating since 1981, that to me is a tragedy.
I know Amy will have a question in just a second, but there's something I've wondered about for years. People always pin the economy on the president, but how much leverage does a president have to control the economy?
It's a little like quarterbacking a football team. If your team wins the Super Bowl, you're a great quarterback. If not, you're regarded as lousy. They don't have direct control, but they can lead. They can pass legislation that gets us started. I mentioned TARP before. President Bush, who the much derided, and at the time, that people had contempt for him. His approval ratings were unbelievably bad. He got that through. He got TARP through, and that's the kind of, we need compromise. We need politics of compromise to get laws passed. That's all the president can do, is lead. He can't do it all.
Well, that is actually a good lead in to the question that I was having. It's like we read each other's mind. But when you look at what these candidates are talking about, a lot of it is sort of stuff around the edges. We're going to change a tax rate here. We're going to make sure that these millionaires pay more there. Are they addressing at all what are the structural issues going on in this economy?
Jobs.
So how
the
do you-
tax
how do
code
you
stuff
address that?
is a bunch of noise. You need the middle class jobs to come back, and the way you do that is to get these corporations to bring the money back home. We've got $1 trillion. That's 13-digit number in corporate cash sitting abroad. And the reason we do is because we have the highest corporate tax rate in the world among civilized nations. You lower that, you get the jobs coming back to the states, and you recreate that middle class. Now, Obama and Romney are both supportive of a tax cut for corporations. It takes the political will to come out there and say, you know what, I know you don't like the corporations, but we're cutting their taxes because we need the cash back here to build the factories. They both want to do it. Are they willing to stand up and do it tonight with 60 million Americans watching? Who's going to lead? Guide me. Somebody guide me.
Well, one other thing that we've heard a lot of people talk about in the political press is maybe voters are getting used to this economy as the new normal. And that is, we heard Senator Thune talk about the political gravity. Why is the president doing as well as he is, considering how bad things are? That Americans, you said they're optimistic. I think that's very true. But do Americans now just think, well, this is the way things are. This is a new economy?
I think they're cynics, and I think it's you got 2 minutes. I compare this to a Tyson fight. There used to be a boxer, Mike Tyson, who had to win early or things got a little bad. Both candidates have to come out fast in that opening 2-minute statement and tell people why they shouldn't consider this a new
Would you
normal.
advise them to bite the ear of their opponent?
Yeah, maybe.
Mike Tyson?
If it comes up. If they get the chance and the proximity's right down, then maybe you bite the ear. But what you have to do is
Now, that
humanize
would
the
be a
numbers.
viral moment.
Mitt Romney needs to humanize the numbers. President Obama needs to not say things like it could have been worse. It could have been worse is not a platform. That's actually no good. You got to tell me how you're getting me from here to there. The bleeding stopped. That's just fine. This isn't the new normal because this is not acceptable.
Jeff Mackey, excellent to have you on.
It's great to be
Our
here.
partners over at Yahoo News. Hopefully we'll come back and talk to you after the debate and get your views. Let's go to another valuable partner of ABC News right now, Univision. Leon Krause. Leon is joining us from LA. Leon, did I get your last name? Did I pronounce that correctly?
Absolutely. Perfect.
I did.
Perfect.
Excellent. Otherwise, John Carl from our fact
Yes, you did.
desk would be all over me.
Thank you, sir.
What are you looking for, Leon? What are you looking for tonight from your vantage point?
Much better, but I should say much better than Amy did with my last name at the conventions,
Yeah.
and I should say hi to you
Thank
both.
you. Thank you.
Well, no, that's the truth, Amy. I'm sorry. Well, I think that especially thinking about the Latino vote, we would like to see some sort of reference to the plight of the Hispanic population, although I do agree with Jorge Ramos, who basically said yesterday that the Latino vote is no longer in play, and especially when you take into account the margin in the most recent poll, 50 points the difference between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney. Barack Obama standing at 70%, Mitt Romney at 20%. That's less than half what George W. Bush got in 2004, Amy. So it has been a catastrophe for the Republican Party these last 8 years when it comes to a Latino vote. So can Mitt Romney change that? I doubt it, but he might try.
Leon, talk to us a little bit about the story that you all broke, Univision, about the Fast and Furious program, the infamous giving guns essentially into Mexico in the hope of catching the bigger bad guys. What impact do you think that this issue itself, especially in those states that border Mexico, is going to have?
Well, it's a big story. In Mexico, it was an enormous story. I remember it very well. I was back in Mexico last year when the story broke. It was quite a big scandal. I don't know if it has been that important here in the United States, especially in the southern part of the United States, for many reasons. One of them being that I don't really get the idea, I don't really get the sense that the whole gun control issue, Amy, is such a big deal in the United States. So why should this very controversial program that apparently the United States government started, and apparently with the cooperation, or at least the knowledge of the Mexican government, started last year as a botched attempt to catch the bad guys, or the arms dealers, arm traffickers, have any impact on the election. I don't think that it will, actually. I think it's journalistically relevant, but I don't get the impression that it will have any impact on the election itself, even in the southwest border states that have been and will be so important for the November election.
Leon Krause, excellent to have you on tonight. We really appreciate it. And by the way, I love your last name. It's so mellifluous, just pours off the tongue. And I love that I can say it better than Amy, too. That's really particularly delicious for me. Again, we really appreciate your time. Thank you.
I really appreciate it.
Okay. So this just in. We got a picture via Twitter of Mitt Romney playing Jenga as he prepares for his debate.
That does not look relaxing to me.
No,
that's stressful.
Another high-stakes way to prepare for a high-stakes evening.
He doesn't even look like he's not even worried about it.
He looks like he's more observing than playing.
I agree. Well, I also wanted to go to one of our friends here on Twitter. Mm-hmm. They sent to the hashtag Dan and Amy and asked us, which question do you think is the real stumper for one candidate, for each candidate actually, the one question that they know that they don't want to get, they know that they're going to have to answer for. I mean, I think obviously for Mitt Romney, he's answered the 47% question a lot of times, but he hasn't answered it particularly well.
And not in front of an audience of 50 million people.
That's right. So I think being able to articulate, not just to say I care about 100% of the people, but actually go at that. And then I think, what do you think for the president, what is the stumpiest question he could get? The one that will really...
You know, I don't know. I mean, I think it's just going to be putting him on the defensive about the state of the economy and saying you can't just push this. You've now been in charge for more than 3 years. You can't just push this off on your Republican predecessors. Right. Well, you think you're the political pundit?
No, I think I think that's exactly right. It's answering that. You saw it in the Univision forum. They really pushed the president, for example, on immigration. They said, this was a promise you made. You broke this promise. And the president's answer was, not that great. So those are the sorts of things, again, when you're the incumbent, you've made promises, people are going to hold you accountable.
You've got a record and people are going to scrutinize it. There's no question about that. So we're on the internet tonight, so we want to talk about a webby issue, or as Amy would call it, the internet thing. We've got Phoebe Connolly here for us from Yahoo. You are going to be tracking the whole social angle tonight.
The entire internet.
You're going to be tracking the entire internet. That's a big assignment. Now, what do we expect the tweet volume will be tonight?
So it's an interesting thing. This afternoon, Twitter put out that in the past 24 hours, there have been more tweets about this debate than there were about all of the debates in 2008.
Huh.
So
Twitter wasn't that big in 2008.
Exactly. So this is one of those things that we can look at past political events that have happened, the conventions, and look to see, the tweet volume around that. Barack Obama got the most tweets per minute, the most number of people sort of tweeting about him. We put up some of the other numbers from the conventions.
52 grand a minute.
A minute at its peak. But another political event similar, the State of the Union, only had 14,000 tweets per minute. So we're all kind of watching tonight to see what that volume looks like.
And remind us again, Usain Bolt has the most tweets per minute of anyone ever in the history of the internet.
Well, in recent memory,
recent memory, Twitter's been around for like 25 minutes.
I mean, but the internet's recent memory is very short.
Very short.
Mm-hmm. But 80,000 tweets per minute.
Okay, so that's the bar.
Odds of topping that tonight?
We're going to watch and see.
But you have said that the thing that you're really looking for is, and that this is the term you're using, a meme-worthy moment.
A meme-worthy. Okay, so that's when the politicians just open up this space for people to crack jokes. That's when Rick Perry tries to name these agencies and leaves the third one hanging. I mean, Twitter is ready to jump in there with plenty of suggestions. Clint Eastwood in the chair. So I think that's what everyone's looking for this evening. And we have a way for folks at home to follow along. There's an app, a Yahoo app called Into Now. Go into your app store. It's free. You can download it. That's the icon that you're looking for. And when you go in there, there's a feature called Cap It. And what Cap It will let you do is take a shot of the screen that you're seeing in front of you on the live stream that you're watching from home, and then add your own caption. Here they, captioned this USA, but we're going to monitor and then at the end bring you the best Cap Its from the Into Now app.
I think that's great. I would like to have my own. I brought mine.
Okay, great.
Unfortunately,
mine
my
too.
son put the Hot Wheels sticker on the back, so this is
think
not
that
mine. Do you think it makes it look a little cooler?
No, I think it makes it very cool.
I think that's very cool. And then one last thing. Tell us what we can expect about. I know my favorite is that Tumblr is going to have its own running GIF. They're going to cover the debate in GIFs.
All in GIFs, and we've already reached out to Tumblr, and they're going to be in touch and let us know what was the most shared GIF of the evening, and we are going to bring that to you at the end.
All right, thank you.
fantastic.
We'll
Thanks,
look back
Amy.
with you after the debate. Thanks for coming on. We appreciate it.
And we're going to turn now to Holly Bailey, who is joining us. I think you're out in Denver, Holly, right? Yes, yay, there you are. Joining us from
the spin room.
the spin room. And Holly, you, of course, she's with our partners, Yahoo News. You've been on the campaign trail for, I'm sure it feels for you years, but it's been months.
Forever.
Forever. Tell us, in your piece today, you told us a little bit about the relationship between Mitt Romney and Barack Obama. They don't really love each other, do they?
No, not very much, and that's one thing that's a dynamic that I think is going to be interesting to watch tonight. This is the first time that they're going to be meeting in person in years. They've only met a handful of times, less than 5 times according to the campaign, and this meeting tonight comes after months and months and months of really negative attacks, really personal attacks. And one thing that we know about Mitt Romney and President Obama is that they don't really forget about negative attacks like that. The campaign's told us, they don't take it personally, but it's really hard to believe, and so. Given the fact that they've really come out as attack dogs against their opponents. And so it's going to be really interesting tonight to see the dynamic between these two guys.
Holly, how much work do you think has been done by the people prepping each of the candidates to get them not to come off as either disrespectful or angry or hurt?
A lot. One thing from the Romney campaign, I was told that Senator Rob Portman, who is the stand-in for Barack Obama, he was instructed specifically to push Mitt Romney's buttons in order to sort of draw out his anger and teach the candidate not to come off as testy or irritated as he sometimes did during the GOP primary debates. The Romney campaign really wants to work on their likability numbers. If you look at every poll, most voters still seem to like President Obama a lot more, and Mitt Romney knows he has a problem there, and so he doesn't want to come off as really irritable or angry tonight.
Holly, can you, for the viewers at home who haven't covered a presidential debate, tell us a little bit about where you are, because I think for most people watching this and watching the debates, they think that reporters sit in the room with the folks who are watching the debate. Tell us where you are and what you guys do as you watch these debates.
We actually, the way that reporters, there are 4,000 reporters credentialed here, I believe, and most of them are in the room behind me in the press filing center. We're actually in the really in the hall where the candidates are going to be, but we're in a room adjacent. Essentially, we're watching it just as viewers watch it at home. We're looking at it on giant TVs, scattered on TVs across the room. So our experience isn't going to be very much different than the viewers at home tonight.
Although you may have better food in your room.
Maybe.
Than we do here.
Than we do here. That is true. Although it's that thing you say to your bosses, I need to fly all the way to Denver
to sit
in a room with a bunch of other reporters to watch this on TV.
Yeah, but the one advantage we have is that after, whatever happens after this debate, we're in the room where the spin room is going to happen. All the advisors are going to come out and give their explanation for why they think their candidate did best tonight, and that's really why we're all here.
All right, Holly Bailey, thank you very much for coming on, joining us from Denver. Have a great time out there. And now we are like so close to game time.
We've got 2 of the most heavily addicted political junkies in the universe sitting here. One, Rick Klein, and the other, Amy Walter. How excited do political geeks like the 2 of you get as we as the moments tick down?
I don't know.
Like a geek?
I don't know what you're talking about. I was here for the game of Jenga. Did I get the wrong address on this? No, look. This is the World Series. This is the big show. You only get 4 of these, including the vice presidential one, once every 4 years. And there's only one first encounter. I mean, it's that moment when they both come out. These men have only met 3 times before in their entire lives. To meet in this stage, it's a unique moment. It's a special moment. I think it's great for democracy to even have it come to pass that you have a debate like this.
Gut check time. Let me just put you both on the spot. Who do you think comes out ahead from this first debate? Wild guess.
Mitt Romney. I think he's primed for a comeback moment. I think the whole story of this campaign is set up actually pretty well for him because he's had such a rough couple of weeks. He's had some polling numbers that look a little better in the last couple of days, and I think his campaign feels like it has the wind a little bit out of the back, at least not blowing in their faces anymore. And there's a month left in this campaign. Of course, it's not over. It's not close to over. No one's voted yet, or not many people have voted yet. So there's just too much at stake to declare it over. So I think the country, the media covering it, everyone has an interest in seeing this a race and finding something in Mitt Romney's performance that's likely to keep him in the mix a little bit. So I think he is primed for a big moment. And I also think the challenger is enhanced by being up there against the president one-on-one. You're on equal footing.
Just by dint of being on the same stage.
That's right. Although he does come in not only as a underdog in the polls, but in the expectations as well. You saw in our own poll, 2-1. People think that President Obama is going to win this debate. It could win. It could play to his advantage because I think you're right. There are a whole bunch of folks, especially folks sitting in that media filing center, saying, "Okay, this was his moment. He did a very good job. He's going to get a bounce out of this." But I think really the structural question is going to be very important going forward, which is what can Mitt Romney do between, if he does come out of this with a bounce, between this moment and the next debate? Can he keep that momentum going, or will he lose that as we go into debate number 2, which is a town hall meeting, a town hall style, which you would think would be a little bit better for President Obama again?
It's interesting talking to Romney advisors about this. They don't talk about this in terms of knockout punches or game-changing moments. They talk about this as continuing the story, continuing the introduction, continuing what they were able to do in terms of denting Barack Obama's momentum. So they feel like if they come out on top, even if it's slightly on top right now, they have something to build on. They'll be giving a foreign policy speech in a couple of days. Of course, the vice presidential debate next week, which will be exciting. There's a lot to build on, and you have some marking points to start to put those pieces in place, to steal a Jenga analogy.
But it's still, it's well played, sir. It's still a game at the margin because so many people in this country have already made up their mind. We're talking about, what, several million people in a couple battleground states?
Maybe 10 million people across the country, and a smaller number than that in the actual battleground states, 7% of the country or so maybe that are truly undecided, and a smaller margin that's going to be watching the debate tonight. So you have to play for them, also play for the folks who are going to see various pieces of this spliced up, the comedy writers who are going to take pieces of it and run with it. Look for those little sticky moments, those one-liners that are going to become part of debate lore. And of course, look for this big moment where he's out there showing the country who he's about.
Well, and that's really the issue. Is this going to change the narrative, or is it going to really cement the current narrative? Yep.
And as we said at the top of this live stream, after months of scripted speeches and 30-second attack ads and these highly choreographed events like the conventions, now, tonight, finally, and you're looking at the stage, finally we're on the cusp of potentially some real human moments.
Some real human moments, and also the chance to see these two one-on-one. You can run negative ads against your opponent till the day is long, but when you have to look that person in the eye and say those things about them, can't hide behind the TV, that's very different.
And bear in mind, they've only met 3 times before tonight. The wives entering the room. There's Ann Romney giving a hug to Michelle Obama. We are 20 seconds away now from the start of the first presidential debate. There's Jim Lehrer on the stage.
That has to be so nerve-wracking.
And look how lonely it is. Those podiums sitting up there. Yeah, you're the man in the middle of it.
Man.
That's the truth.
We want to remind everybody on the other side of this debate, we'll be back with an hour of post-game coverage. Keep it here. We'll be back in an hour and a half after the debate.
Good evening from the Magnus Arena at the University of Denver in Denver, Colorado. I'm Jim Lehrer of the PBS NewsHour, and I welcome you to the first of the 2012 presidential debates between President Barack Obama, the Democratic nominee, and former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney, the Republican nominee. This debate and the next 3, 2 presidential, 1 vice presidential, are sponsored by the Commission on Presidential Debates. Tonight's 90 minutes will be about domestic issues and will follow a format designed by the Commission. There will be 6 roughly 15-minute segments with 2-minute answers for the first question, then open discussion for the remainder of each segment. Thousands of people offered suggestions on segment subjects or questions via the internet and other means, but I made the final selections, and for the record, they were not submitted for approval to the Commission or the candidates. The segments, as I announced in advance, will be 3 on the economy and 1 each on health care, the role of government, and governing, with an emphasis throughout on differences, specifics, and choices. Both candidates will also have 2-minute closing statements. The audience here in the hall has promised to remain silent. No cheers, applause, boos, hisses, among other noisy, distracting things, so we may all concentrate on what the candidates have to say. There is a noise exception right now, though, as we welcome President Obama and Governor Romney.
Jim.
Gentlemen, welcome to you both. Let's start the economy, segment 1, and let's begin with jobs. What are the major differences between the two of you about how you would go about creating new jobs? You have 2 minutes. Each of you have 2 minutes to start. A coin toss is determined. Mr. President, you go first.
Well, thank you very much, Jim, for this opportunity. I want to thank Governor Romney and the University of Denver for your hospitality. There are a lot of points I want to make tonight, but the most important one is that 20 years ago I became the luckiest man on earth because Michelle Obama agreed to marry me. And so I just want to wish, sweetie, you happy anniversary and let you know that a year from now we will not be celebrating it in front of 40 million people. 4 years ago, we went through the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. Millions of jobs were lost. The auto industry was on the brink of collapse. The financial system had frozen up. And because of the resilience and the determination of the American people, we've begun to fight our way back. Over the last 30 months, we've seen 5 million jobs in the private sector created. The auto industry has come roaring back, and housing has begun to rise. But we all know that we've still got a lot of work to do. And so the question here tonight is not where we've been, but where we're going. Governor Romney has a perspective that says if we cut taxes skewed towards the wealthy and roll back regulations, that we'll be better off. I've got a different view. I think we've got to invest in education and training. I think it's important for us to develop new sources of energy here in America, that we change our tax code to make sure that we're helping small businesses and companies that are investing here in the United States, that we take some of the money that we're saving as we wind down 2 wars to rebuild America, and that we reduce our deficit in a balanced way that allows us to make these critical investments. Now, it ultimately is going to be up to the voters, to you, which path we should take. Are we going to double down on the top-down economic policies that help to get us into this mess, or do we embrace a new economic patriotism that says America does best when the middle class does best? And I'm looking forward to having that debate.
Governor Romney, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Jim. It's an honor to be here with you, and I appreciate the chance to be with the President. I'm pleased to be at the University of Denver. I appreciate their welcome, and also the Presidential Commission on these debates. And congratulations to you, Mr. President, on your anniversary. I'm sure this was the most romantic place you could imagine, here with me. So congratulations. This is obviously a very tender topic. I've had the occasion over the last couple of years of meeting people across the country. I was in Dayton, Ohio, and a woman grabbed my arm and she said, "I've been out of work since May. Can you help me?" Ann yesterday was at a rally in Denver, and a woman came up to her with a baby in her arms and said, "Ann, my husband has had 4 jobs in 3 years, part-time jobs. He's lost his most recent job, and we've now just lost our home. Can you help us?" And the answer is yes, we can help, but it's going to take a different path, not the one we've been on, not the one the President describes as a top-down cut taxes for the rich. That's not what I'm going to do. My plan has 5 basic parts. One, get us energy independent, North American energy independent. That creates about 4 million jobs. Number two, open up more trade, particularly in Latin America. Crack down on China if and when they cheat. Number three, make sure our people have the skills they need to succeed and the best schools in the world. We're far away from that now. Number four, get us to a balanced budget. Number five, champion small business. It's small business that creates the jobs in America. And over the last 4 years, small business people have decided that America may not be the place to open a new business because new business startups are down to a 30-year low. I know what it takes to get small business growing again, to hire people. Now, I'm concerned that the path that we're on has just been unsuccessful. The president has a view very similar to the view he had when he ran 4 years ago, that a bigger government, spending more, taxing more, regulating more, if you will, trickle-down government would work. That's not the right answer for America. I'll restore the vitality that gets America working again. Thank you.
Mr. President, please respond directly to what the governor just said about trickle-down, his trickle-down approach, as he said yours is.
Well, let me talk specifically about what I think we need to do. First, we've got to improve our education system. And we've made enormous progress drawing on ideas both from Democrats and Republicans that are already starting to show gains in some of the toughest to deal with schools. We've got a program called Race to the Top that has prompted reforms in 46 states around the country, raising standards, improving how we train teachers. So now I want to hire another 100,000 new math and science teachers and create 2 million more slots in our community colleges so that people can get trained for the jobs that are out there right now. And I want to make sure that we keep tuition low for our young people. When it comes to our tax code, Governor Romney and I both agree that our corporate tax rate is too high. So I want to lower it, particularly for manufacturing, taking it down to 25%. But I also want to close those loopholes that are giving incentives for companies that are shipping jobs overseas. I want to provide tax breaks for companies that are investing here in the United States. On energy, Governor Romney and I, we both agree that we've got to boost American energy production. And oil and natural gas production are higher than they've been in years. But I also believe that we've got to look at the energy sources of the future, like wind and solar and biofuels, and make those investments. So all of this is possible. Now, in order for us to do it, we do have to close our deficit. And one of the things I'm sure we'll be discussing tonight is how do we deal with our tax code? And how do we make sure that we are reducing spending in a responsible way, but also how do we have enough revenue to make those investments? And this is where there's a difference, because Governor Romney's central economic plan calls for a $5 trillion tax cut on top of the extension of the Bush tax cuts. That's another $1 trillion, and $2 trillion in additional military spending that the military hasn't asked for. That's $8 trillion. How we pay for that, reduce the deficit, and make the investments that we need to make without dumping those costs on the middle-class Americans, I think, is one of the central questions of this campaign.
Both of you have spoken about a lot of different things, and we're going to try to get through them in as specific a way as we possibly can. But first, Governor Romney, do you have a question that you'd like to ask the president directly about something he just said?
Well, sure. I'd like to clear up the record and go through piece by piece. First of all, I don't have a $5 trillion tax cut. I don't have a tax cut of the scale that you're talking about. My view is that we ought to provide tax relief to people in the middle class. But I'm not going to reduce the share of taxes paid by high-income people. High-income people are doing just fine in this economy. They'll do fine whether you're president or I am. The people who are having the hard time right now are middle-income Americans. Under the president's policies, middle-income Americans have been buried. They're just being crushed. Middle-income Americans have seen their income come down by $4,300. This is a tax in and of itself. I'll call it the economy tax. It's been crushing. At the same time, gasoline prices have doubled under the president. Electric rates are up. Food prices are up. Health care costs have gone up by $2,500 a family. Middle-income families are being crushed. And so the question is how to get them going again. And I've described it. It's energy and trade, the right kind of training programs, balancing our budget, and helping small business. Those are the cornerstones of my plan. But the president mentioned a couple of other ideas I'll just note. First, education. I agree. Education is key, particularly the future of our economy. But our training programs right now, we got 47 of them housed in the federal government, reporting to 8 different agencies. Overhead is overwhelming. We got to get those dollars back to the states and go to the workers so they can create their own pathways to getting the training they need for jobs that will really help them. The second area, taxation. We agree we ought to bring the tax rates down, and I do, both for corporations and for individuals. But in order for us not to lose revenue, and have the government run out of money, I also lower deductions and credits and exemptions so that we keep taking in the same money when you also account for growth. The third area, energy. Energy is critical, and the president pointed out correctly that production of oil and gas in the U.S. is up, but not due to his policies, in spite of his policies. Mr. President, all of the increase in natural gas and oil has happened on private land, not on government land. On government land, your administration has cut the number of permits and licenses in half. If I'm president, I'll double them and also get the oil from offshore in Alaska, and I'll bring that pipeline in from Canada. And by the way, I like coal. I'm going to make sure we can continue to burn clean coal. People in the coal industry feel like it's getting crushed by your policies. I want to get America and North America energy independent so we can create those jobs. And finally, with regards to that tax cut, look, I'm not looking to cut massive taxes and to reduce the revenues going to the government. My number one principle is there'll be no tax cut that adds to the deficit. I want to underline that. No tax cut that adds to the deficit. But I do want to reduce the burden being paid by middle-income Americans. And to do that, that also means I cannot reduce the burden paid by high-income Americans. So any language to the contrary is simply not accurate.
Mr. President?
Well, I think let's talk about taxes because I think it's instructive. Now, 4 years ago when I stood on this stage, I said that I would cut taxes for middle-class families. And that's exactly what I did. We cut taxes for middle-class families by about $3,600. And the reason is because I believe that we do best when the middle class is doing well. And by giving them those tax cuts, they had a little more money in their pocket. And so maybe they can buy a new car. They are certainly in a better position to weather the extraordinary recession that we went through. They can buy a computer for their kid who's going off to college, which means they're spending more money, businesses have more customers, businesses make more profits, and then hire more workers. Now, Governor Romney's proposal that he's been promoting for 18 months calls for a $5 trillion tax cut on top of $2 trillion of additional spending for our military. And he is saying that he is going to pay for it by closing loopholes and deductions. The problem is that he's been asked over 100 times how you would close those deductions and loopholes, and he hasn't been able to identify them. But I'm going to make an important point here, Jim. When you add up all the loopholes and deductions that upper income individuals are currently taking advantage of, you take those all away, you don't come close to paying for $5 trillion in tax cuts and $2 trillion in additional military spending. And that's why independent studies looking at this said the only way to meet Governor Romney's pledge of not reducing the deficit or not adding to the deficit is by burdening middle-class families. The average middle-class family with children would pay about $2,000 more. Now, that's not my analysis. That's the analysis of economists who have looked at this. And that kind of top-down economics where folks at the top are doing well, so the average person making $3 million is getting a $250,000 tax break, while middle-class families are burdened further, that's not what I believe is a recipe for economic growth.
All right. What is the difference?
Well,
let's just stay on taxes.
Right.
Yeah, let's just stay on taxes for a moment here.
Well, but
what is the difference?
Virtually everything he just said about my tax plan is inaccurate.
All right.
So if the tax plan he described were a tax plan I was asked to support, I'd say absolutely not. I'm not looking for a $5 trillion tax cut. What I've said is I won't put in place a tax cut that adds to the deficit. That's part one. So there's no economist can say Mitt Romney's tax plan adds $5 trillion if I say I will not add to the deficit with my tax plan. Number two, I will not reduce the share paid by high-income individuals. I know that you and your running mate keep saying that, and I know it's a popular thing to say with a lot of people, but it's just not the case. Look, I got 5 boys. I'm used to people saying something that's not always true, but just keep on repeating it and ultimately hoping I'll believe it. But that is not the case, all right? I will not reduce the taxes paid by high-income Americans. And number three, I will not, under any circumstances, raise taxes on middle-income families. I will lower taxes on middle-income families. Now, you cite a study. There's 6 other studies that looked at the study you described and say it's completely wrong. I saw a study that came out today that said you're going to raise taxes by $3,000 to $4,000 on middle-income families. There are all these studies out there. But let's get at the bottom line. That is, I want to bring down rates. I want to bring the rates down, at the same time lower deductions and exemptions and credits and so forth, so we keep getting the revenue we need. And you think, well, then why lower the rates? And the reason is because small business pays that individual rate. 54% of America's workers work in businesses that are taxed not at the corporate tax rate, but at the individual tax rate. And if we lower that rate, they will be able to hire more people. For me, this is about jobs.
Right.
This is about getting jobs for the American people.
Yeah. Do you challenge what the governor just said about his own plan?
Well, for 18 months, he's been running on this tax plan. And now, 5 weeks before the election, he's saying that his big, bold idea is never mind. And the fact is that if you are lowering the rates the way you described, Governor, then it is not possible to come up with enough deductions and loopholes that only affect high-income individuals to avoid either raising the deficit or burdening the middle class. It's math. It's arithmetic. Now, Governor Romney and I do share a deep interest in encouraging small business growth. So at the same time that my tax plan has already lowered taxes for 98% of families, I also lowered taxes for small businesses 18 times. And what I want to do is continue the tax rates, the tax cuts that we put into place for small businesses and families. But I have said that for incomes over $250,000 a year, that we should go back to the rates that we had when Bill Clinton was president, when we created 23 million new jobs, went from deficit to surplus, and created a whole lot of millionaires to boot. And the reason this is important is because by doing that, we can not only reduce the deficit, we can not only encourage job growth through small businesses, but we're also able to make the investments that are necessary in education or in energy. And we do have a difference, though, when it comes to definitions of small business. You know, under my plan, 97% of small businesses would not see their income taxes go up. Governor Romney says, well, those top 3%, they're the job creators, they'd be burdened. But under Governor Romney's definition, there are a whole bunch of millionaires and billionaires who are small businesses. Donald Trump is a small business. And I know Donald Trump doesn't like to think of himself as small anything, but that's how you define small businesses if you're getting business income. And that kind of approach, I believe, will not grow our economy, because the only way to pay for it without either burdening the middle class or blowing up our deficit is to make drastic cuts in things like education, making sure that we are continuing to invest in basic science and research, all the things that are helping America grow. And I think that would be a mistake.
All right,
Jim, let me just come back on that point, which
just
is
these
small businesses we're talking about.
Excuse me, just so everybody understands. Yeah. We're way over our first 15 minutes.
It's fun, isn't it?
It's okay. It's great.
That's
great.
okay.
No problem. Now you all don't have a
good.
problem. I don't have a problem, because we're still on the economy.
Right.
But we're going to come back to taxes and want to move on to the deficit and a lot of other things too. Okay, but go ahead, sir.
You bet. Well, Mr. President, you're absolutely right, which is that with regards to 97% of the businesses are not taxed at the 35% tax rate. They're taxed at a lower rate. But those businesses that are in the last 3% of businesses happen to employ half of all the people who work in small business. Those are the businesses that employ 1/4 of all the workers in America. And your plan is to take their tax rate from 35% to 40%. Now, I talked to a guy who has a very small business. He's in the electronics business in St. Louis. He has 4 employees. He said he and his son calculated how much they pay in taxes. Mm-hmm. Federal income tax, federal payroll tax, state income tax, state sales tax, state property tax, gasoline tax. It added up to well over 50% of what they earned. And your plan is to take the tax rate on successful small businesses from 35% to 40%. The National Federation of Independent Businesses has said that will cost 700,000 jobs. I don't want to cost jobs. My priority is jobs. And so what I do is I bring down the tax rates, lower deductions and exemptions. The same idea behind Bowles-Simpson, by the way. Get the rates down, lower deductions and exemptions to create more jobs, because there's nothing better for getting us to a balanced budget than having more people working, earning more money, paying more taxes. That's by far the most effective and efficient way to get this budget balanced.
Jim, you may want to move on to another topic, but I would just say this to the American people. If you believe that we can cut taxes by $5 trillion and add $2 trillion in additional spending that the military is not asking for, $7 trillion, just to give you a sense, over 10 years, that's more than our entire defense budget. And you think that by closing loopholes and deductions for the well-to-do, somehow you will not end up picking up the tab, then Governor Romney's plan may work for you. But I think math, common sense, and our history shows us that's not a recipe for job growth. Look, we've tried this. We've tried both approaches. The approach that Governor Romney's talking about is the same sales pitch that was made in 2001 and 2003. And we ended up with the slowest job growth in 50 years. We ended up moving from surplus to deficits, and it all culminated in the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. Bill Clinton tried the approach that I'm talking about. We created 23 million new jobs. We went from deficit to surplus, and businesses did very well. So in some ways, we've got some data on which approach is more likely to create jobs and opportunity for Americans. And I believe that the economy works best when middle-class families are getting tax breaks so that they've got some money in their pockets. And those of us who have done extraordinarily well because of this magnificent country that we live in, that we can afford to do a little bit more to make sure we're not blowing up the deficit.
Jim, the president began this segment, so I think I get the last word. So I'm going to take it.
You're going to get the first word in the next segment.
Well, but he gets the first word of that segment. I get the last word of that segment. I hope. Let me just make this comment. First of all, let me repeat what I said. I'm not in favor of a $5 trillion tax cut. That's not my plan. My plan is not to put in place any tax cut that will add to the deficit. That's point one. So you may keep referring to it as a $5 trillion tax cut, but that's not my plan. Okay. Number two, let's look at history. My plan is not like anything that's been tried before. My plan is to bring down rates, but also bring down deductions and exemptions and credits at the same time, so the revenue stays in, but that we bring down rates to get more people working. My priority is putting people back to work in America. They're suffering in this country. And we talk about evidence. Look at the evidence of the last 4 years. It's absolutely extraordinary. We've got 23 million people out of work or stopped looking for work in this country.
All right.
We've got, when the president took office, 32 million people on food stamps, 47 million on food stamps today. Economic growth this year, slower than last year, and last year slower than the year before. Going forward with the status quo is not going to cut it for the American people who are struggling today.
All right, let's talk. We're still on the economy. This is theoretically now a second segment still on the economy, and specifically on what to do about the federal deficit, the federal debt. And the question, you each have 2 minutes on this, and Governor Romney, you go first because the president went first on segment one. And the question is this: what are the differences between the two of you as to how you would go about tackling the deficit problem in this country?
Well, good. I'm glad you raised that, and it's a critical issue. I think it's not just an economic issue. I think it's a moral issue. I think it's frankly not moral for my generation to keep spending massively more than we take in, knowing those burdens are going to be passed on to the next generation. And they're going to be paying the interest and the principal all their lives. And the amount of debt we're adding at $1 trillion a year is simply not moral. So how do we deal with it? Well, mathematically, there are 3 ways that you can cut a deficit. One, of course, is to raise taxes. Number 2 is to cut spending. And number 3 is to grow the economy. Because if more people work in a growing economy, they're paying taxes, and you can get the job done that way. The president would prefer raising taxes. I understand. The problem with raising taxes is that it slows down the rate of growth, and you can never quite get the job done. I want to lower spending and encourage economic growth at the same time. What things would I cut from spending? Well, first of all, I will eliminate all programs by this test if they don't pass it. Is the program so critical it's worth borrowing money from China to pay for it? And if not, I'll get rid of it. Obamacare is on my list. I apologize, Mr. President. I use that term with all respect, by the way. Good. Okay, good. So I'll get rid of that. I'm sorry, Jim. I'm going to stop the subsidy to PBS. I'm going to stop other things. I like PBS. I love Big Bird. I actually like you too. But I'm not going to keep on spending money on things to borrow money from China to pay for. So that's number one. Number two, I'll take programs that are currently good programs, but I think could be run more efficiently at the state level and send them to the state. Number three, I'll make government more efficient. I'm going to cut back the number of employees, combine some agencies and departments. My cutbacks will be done through attrition, by the way. This is the approach we have to take to get America to a balanced budget. The president said he'd cut the deficit in half. Unfortunately, he doubled it. $1 trillion deficits for the last 4 years. The president's put in place as much public debt, almost as much debt held by the public as all prior presidents combined.
Mr. President, 2 minutes.
When I walked into the Oval Office, I had more than $1 trillion deficit greeting me. And we know where it came from. 2 wars that were paid for on a credit card, 2 tax cuts that were not paid for, and a whole bunch of programs that were not paid for, and then a massive economic crisis. And despite that, what we've said is, yes, we had to take some initial emergency measures to make sure we didn't slip into a Great Depression. But what we've also said is, let's make sure that we are cutting out those things that are not helping us grow. So 77 government programs, everything from aircrafts that the Air Force had ordered but weren't working very well. 18 government programs for education that were well-intentioned but weren't helping kids learn. We went after medical fraud in Medicare and Medicaid very aggressively, more aggressively than ever before, and have saved tens of billions of dollars, $50 billion of waste taken out of the system. And I worked with Democrats and Republicans to cut $1 trillion out of our discretionary domestic budget. That's the largest cut in the discretionary domestic budget since Dwight Eisenhower. Now, we all know that we've got to do more. And so I put forward a specific $4 trillion deficit reduction plan. It's on a website. You can look at all the numbers, what cuts we make and what revenue we raise. And the way we do it is $2.50 for every cut. We ask for $1 of additional revenue, paid for, as I indicated earlier, by asking those of us who have done very well in this country to contribute a little bit more to reduce the deficit. Governor Romney earlier mentioned the Bowles-Simpson Commission. Well, that's how the commission, bipartisan commission that talked about how we should move forward, suggested we have to do it in a balanced way with some revenue and some spending cuts. And this is a major difference that Governor Romney and I have. Let me just finish this point because you're looking for contrast. When Governor Romney stood on a stage with other Republican candidates for the nomination, and he was asked, would you take $10 of spending cuts for just $1 of revenue? And he said no. Now, if you take such an unbalanced approach, then that means you are going to be gutting our investments in schools and education. It means that Governor Romney talked about Medicaid and how we could send it back to the states, but effectively this means a 30% cut in the primary program we help for seniors who are in nursing homes, for kids who are with disabilities.
Mr. President,
and that is not a right strategy for us to move forward.
Way over the 2 minutes.
Sorry.
Governor, what about Simpson Bowles? Will you support Simpson Bowles?
Simpson Bowles, the president should have grabbed that.
No, I mean, do you support Simpson Bowles?
I have my own plan. It's not the same as Simpson Bowles. But in my view, the president should have grabbed it. If he wanted to make some adjustments to it, take it, go to Congress, fight for it.
That's what we've done. Made some adjustments to it, and we're putting it forward before Congress right now. A $4 trillion plan.
But you've been president 4
years.
You've been president 4 years. Right. You said you cut the deficit in half. It's now 4 years later. We still have $1 trillion deficits. The CBO says we'll have $1 trillion deficit each of the next 4 years. If you're reelected, we'll get to $1 trillion debt. I mean, you have said before you'd cut the deficit in half. And I love this idea of $4 trillion in cuts. You found $4 trillion of ways to reduce or to get closer to a balanced budget, except we still show $1 trillion deficits every year. That doesn't get the job done. Let me come back and say, why is it that I don't want to raise taxes? Why don't I want to raise taxes on people? And actually, you said it back in 2010. You said, look, I'm going to extend the tax policies that we have. Now, I'm not going to raise taxes on anyone, because when the economy is growing slow like this, when we're in recession, you shouldn't raise taxes on anyone. Well, the economy is still growing slow. As a matter of fact, it's growing much more slowly now than when you made that statement. And so if you believe the same thing, you just don't want to raise taxes on people. And the reality is, it's not just wealthy people. You mentioned Donald Trump. It's not just Donald Trump you're taxing. It's all those businesses that employ 1/4 of the workers in America, these small businesses that are taxed as individuals. You raise taxes and you kill jobs. That's why the National Federation of Independent Businesses said your plan will kill 700,000 jobs. I don't want to kill jobs in this environment. Let me make one more point.
Okay, let's let him answer the taxes thing for a moment.
Okay.
Mr. President.
Well, we've had this discussion before.
About the idea that in order to reduce the deficit, there has to be revenue in addition to cuts.
There has to be revenue in addition to cuts. Now, Governor Romney has ruled out revenue. He's ruled out revenue.
Absolutely.
Okay, so
look, the revenue I get is by more people working, getting higher pay, paying more taxes. That's how we get growth and how we balance the budget. Right. But the idea of taxing people more, putting more people out of work, you'll never get there. You never balance the budget by raising taxes. Spain spends 42% of their total economy on government.
Okay.
We're now spending 42% of our economy on government. I don't want to go down the path to Spain. I want to go down the path of growth that puts Americans to work with more money coming in because they're working.
Yeah. But Mr. President, you're saying in order to get the job done, it's got to be balanced.
If we're serious, we've got to take a balanced, responsible approach. And by the way, this is not just when it comes to individual taxes. Let's talk about corporate taxes. Now, I've identified areas where we can right away make a change that I believe would actually help the economy. The oil industry gets $4 billion a year in corporate welfare. Basically, they get deductions that those small businesses that Governor Romney refers to, they don't get. Now, does anybody think that ExxonMobil needs some extra money when they're making money every time you go to the pump? Why wouldn't we want to eliminate that? Why wouldn't we eliminate tax breaks for corporate jets? My attitude is if you got a corporate jet, you can probably afford to pay full freight, not get a special break for it. When it comes to corporate taxes, Governor Romney has said he wants to, in a revenue-neutral way, close loopholes, deductions. He hasn't identified which ones they are, but thereby bring down the corporate rate. Well, I want to do the same thing, but I've actually identified how we can do that. And part of the way to do it is to not give tax breaks to companies that are shipping jobs overseas. Right now, you can actually take a deduction for moving a plant overseas. I think most Americans would say that doesn't make sense, and all that raises revenue. And so if we take a balanced approach, what that then allows us to do is also to help young people, the way we already have during my administration, make sure that they can afford to go to college. It means that the teacher that I met in Las Vegas, a wonderful young lady, who describes to me, she's got 42 kids in her class. The first 2 weeks, she's got some of them sitting on the floor until finally they get reassigned. They're using textbooks that are 10 years old. That is not a recipe for growth. That's not how America was built. And so budgets reflect choices. Ultimately, we're going to have to make some decisions. And if we're asking for no revenue, then that means that we've got to get rid of a whole bunch of stuff. And the magnitude of the tax cuts that you're talking about, Governor, would end up resulting in severe hardship for people, but more importantly, would not help us grow. As I indicated before, when you talk about shifting Medicaid to states, we're talking about potentially a 30% cut in Medicaid over time. Now, that may not seem like a big deal when it just is paper, numbers on a sheet of paper. But if we're talking about a family who's got an autistic kid and is depending on that Medicaid, that's a big problem. And governors are creative, there's no doubt about it. But they're not creative enough to make up for 30% of revenue on something like Medicaid. What ends up happening is some people end up not getting help.
Jim, we've gone on a lot of topics there, and so I'm going to it's going to take a minute to go from Medicaid to schools
Come back to Medicaid.
oil to
Yeah.
tax breaks and companies going overseas. So let's go through them one by one. First of all, the Department of Energy has said the tax break for oil companies is $2.8 billion a year. And it's actually an accounting treatment, as you know, that's been in place for 100 years. Now,
it's time to end it.
And in 1 year, you provided $90 billion in breaks to the green energy world. Now, I like green energy as well, but that's about 50 years worth of what oil and gas receives. And you say Exxon and Mobil. Actually, this $2.8 billion goes largely to small companies, to drilling operators and so forth. But, you know, if we get that tax rate from 35% down to 25%, why, that $2.8 billion is on the table. Of course it's on the table. That's probably not going to survive if you get that rate down to 25%. But don't forget, you put $90 billion, like 50 years worth of breaks into solar and wind, to Solyndra and Fisker and Tesla and Enter1. I mean, I had a friend who said you don't just pick the winners and losers, you pick the losers. All right. So this is not the kind of policy you want to have. You want to get America energy secure. The second topic, which is, you said you get a deduction for taking a plant overseas. Look, I've been in business for 25 years. I have no idea what you're talking about. I maybe need to get a new accountant. But the idea that you get a break for shipping jobs overseas is simply not the case. What we do have right now is a setting where I'd like to bring money from overseas back to this country. And finally, Medicaid to states, I'm not quite sure where that came in except this, which is, I would like to take the Medicaid dollars that go to states and say to a state, you're going to get what you got last year, plus inflation, plus 1%, and then you're going to manage your care for your poor in the way you think best. And I remember as a governor, when this idea was floated by Tommy Thompson, the governors, Republican and Democrats, said, please let us do that. We can care for our own poor in so much better and more effective a way than having the federal government tell us how to care for our poor. So let's states. One of the magnificent things about this country is the whole idea that states are the laboratories of democracy. Don't have the federal government tell everybody what kind of training programs they have to have and what kind of Medicaid they have to have. Let states do this. And by the way, if a state gets in trouble, well, we could step in and see if we can find a way to help them. But the right approach is one which relies on the brilliance of our people and states, not the federal government.
2 seconds, and we're going on still on the economy on another part of it.
Okay.
All right. This is segment 3, the economy. Entitlements. First answer goes to you. 2 minutes, Mr. President. Do you see a major difference between the two of you on Social Security?
You know, I suspect that on Social Security we've got a somewhat similar position. Social Security is structurally sound. It's going to have to be tweaked the way it was by Ronald Reagan and Democratic Speaker Tip O'Neill. But it is, the basic structure is sound, but I want to talk about the values behind Social Security and Medicare, and then talk about Medicare, because that's the big driver of our deficits right now. You know, my grandmother, some of you know, helped to raise me. My grandparents did. My grandfather died a while back. My grandmother died 3 days before I was elected president, and she was fiercely independent. She worked her way up. Only had a high school education, started as a secretary, ended up being the vice president of a local bank. And she ended up living alone by choice. And the reason she could be independent was because of Social Security and Medicare. She had worked all her life, put in this money, and understood that there was a basic guarantee, a floor under which she could not go. And that's the perspective I bring when I think about what's called entitlements. You know, the name itself implies some sense of dependency on the part of these folks. These are folks who've worked hard, like my grandmother, and there are millions of people out there who are counting on this. So my approach is to say, how do we strengthen the system over the long term? And in Medicare, what we did was we said, we are going to have to bring down the costs if we're going to deal with our long-term deficits. But to do that, let's look where some of the money is going. $716 billion we were able to save from the Medicare program by no longer overpaying insurance companies, by making sure that we weren't overpaying providers. And using that money, we were actually able to lower prescription drug costs for seniors by an average of $600. And we were also able to make a significant dent in providing them the kind of preventive care that will ultimately save money throughout the system. So the way for us to deal with Medicare in particular is to lower health care costs. When it comes to Social Security, as I said, you don't need a major structural change in order to make sure that Social Security is there for the future.
We'll follow up on this. First, Governor Romney, you have 2 minutes on Social Security and entitlements.
Well, Jim, our seniors depend on these programs, and I know anytime we talk about entitlements, people become concerned that something's going to happen that's going to change their life for the worst. And the answer is neither the President nor I are proposing any changes for any current retirees or near retirees, either to Social Security or Medicare. So if you're 60 or around 60 or older, you don't need to listen any further. But for younger people, we need to talk about what changes are going to be occurring. Oh, I just thought about one. And that is, in fact, I was wrong when I said the President isn't proposing any changes for current retirees. In fact, he is on Medicare. On Social Security, he's not. But on Medicare, for current retirees, he's cutting $716 billion from the program. Now, he says by not overpaying hospitals and providers, actually just going to them and saying, we're going to reduce the rates you get paid across the board. Everybody's going to get a lower rate. That's not just going after places where there's abuse. That's saying we're cutting the rates. Some 15% of hospitals and nursing homes say they won't take any more Medicare patients under that scenario. We also have 50% of doctors who say they won't take more Medicare patients. We have 4 million people on Medicare Advantage that will lose Medicare Advantage because of those $716 billion in cuts. I can't understand how you can cut Medicare $716 billion for current recipients of Medicare. Now you point out, well, we're putting some back. We're going to give them a better prescription program. That's $1 for every 15 you've cut. They're smart enough to know that's not a good trade. I want to take that $716 billion you've cut and put it back into Medicare. By the way, we can include a prescription program if we need to improve it. But the idea of cutting $716 billion from Medicare to be able to balance the additional cost of Obamacare is, in my opinion, a mistake. And with regards to young people coming along, I've got proposals to make sure Medicare and Social Security are there for them without any question.
Mr. President.
First of all, I think it's important for Governor Romney to present this plan that he says will only affect folks in the future. And the essence of the plan is that he would turn Medicare into a voucher program. It's called premium support, but it's understood to be a voucher program. His running mate.
And you don't support that?
I don't, and let me explain why.
Again, that's for future people, right? Not for current retirees.
So if you're 54 or 55, you might want to listen, because this will affect you. The idea, which was originally presented by Congressman Ryan, your running mate, is that we would give a voucher to seniors, and they could go out in the private marketplace and buy their own health insurance. The problem is that because the voucher wouldn't necessarily keep up with healthcare inflation, it was estimated that this would cost the average senior about $6,000 a year. Now, in fairness, what Governor Romney has now said is he'll maintain traditional Medicare alongside it. But there's still a problem, because what happens is those insurance companies are pretty clever at figuring out who are the younger and healthier seniors. They recruit them, leaving the older, sicker seniors in Medicare. And every healthcare economist who looks at it says over time what will happen is the traditional Medicare system will collapse. And then what you've got is folks like my grandmother at the mercy of the private insurance system, precisely at the time when they are most in need of decent health care. So I don't think vouchers are the right way to go. And this is not my only my opinion. AARP thinks that the savings that we obtained from Medicare bolstered the system, lengthened the Medicare trust fund by 8 years. Benefits were not affected at all. And ironically, if you repeal Obamacare, and I have become fond of this term, Obamacare, if you repeal it, what happens is those seniors right away are going to be paying $600 more in prescription care. They're now going to have to be paying copays for basic checkups that can keep them healthier. And the primary beneficiary of that repeal are insurance companies that are estimated to gain billions of dollars back when they aren't making seniors any healthier. And I don't think that's the right approach when it comes to making sure that Medicare is stronger over the long term.
We'll talk about specifically about health care in a moment, but do you support the voucher system, Governor?
What I support is no change for current retirees and near retirees to Medicare, and the President supports taking $716 billion out of that program.
What about the voucher?
So that's number one.
Okay. All right.
Number two is for people coming along that are young. What I do to make sure that we can keep Medicare in place for them is to allow them to either choose the current Medicare program or a private plan, their choice. They get to choose, and they'll have at least 2 plans that will be entirely at no cost to them. So they don't have to pay additional money, no additional $6,000. That's not going to happen. They'll have at least 2 plans. And by the way, if the government can be as efficient as the private sector and offer premiums that are as low as the private sector, people will be happy to get traditional Medicare, or they'll be able to get a private plan. I know my own view is I'd rather have a private plan. I'd just as soon not have the government telling me what kind of health care I get. I'd rather be able to have an insurance company. If I don't like them, I can get rid of them and find a different insurance company. But people will make their own choice. The other thing we have to do to save Medicare, we have to have the benefits high for those that are low income, but for higher income people, we're going to have to lower some of the benefits. We have to make sure this program is there for the long term. That's the plan that I put forward. And by the way, the idea came not even from Paul Ryan or Senator Wyden, who's a co-author of the bill with Paul Ryan in the Senate, but also it came from Bill Clinton's chief of staff. This is an idea that's been around a long time, which is saying, hey, let's see if we can't get competition into the Medicare world so that people can get the choice of different plans at lower cost, better quality, I believe, in competition.